All right, let's dive into a really fascinating legal mystery, one that comes straight from the pages of the Talmud. It's a puzzle that pits one of our deepest human experiences, grief, against a sacred public duty. So everything here revolves around this state called aninut. Now, this isn't just being sad. This is that raw, immediate period of mourning, the time between when a loved one dies and when they're actually buried. A person in this state, called an onen, is essentially told by the law, your only job right now is to honor the dead. They're exempt from almost all other religious duties. But what happens when that intensely private sorrow runs headfirst into a public religious duty you just can't ignore? Something like the Passover offering. And that, right there, is where our mystery really begins. At the heart of this whole thing is a revered sage, Rabbi Shimon. And the problem? Well, he seems to have said two things that are the complete and total opposite of each other. Okay, so on the one hand, Rabbi Shimon says an acute mourner is allowed to eat the Passover sacrifice at night. This implies, of course, that the offering must have been made for them earlier in the day. But then, in a different teaching, he says a mourner is forbidden from bringing any offerings, and he even specifically names the Passover offering. So, what gives? How can a mourner be both allowed and forbidden from the very same offering by the very same rabbi? Now, for the Talmudic sages, a thing like this isn't seen as a mistake. It's a challenge. A contradiction is basically an invitation to become legal detectives and figure out the hidden logic that actually makes both statements true. The first few attempts to solve this are, let's call them, the most straightforward ones. The sages try to find a simple way to just make the problem disappear.
First up is Rav Chisda. He basically suggests it was a clerical error, a typo. He argues that when Rabbi Shimon was rattling off a list of forbidden sacrifices, he just threw in Passover offering out of habit. You know, it's often listed with others. So in his view, it was just a slip of the tongue. It wasn't even supposed to be there.
Rav Sheshit's take is a little more sophisticated. He suggests that when Rabbi Shimon said Passover offering, he didn't mean the main required sacrifice. He meant a secondary peace offering that sometimes came with it. So the main thing is allowed, but the optional extra is not. I mean, they're both plausible, but they kind of feel like easy workarounds, not really deep answers. All right, so the next solution, this one from a sage named Rav Mari, gets a lot more complex. He argues that the answer isn't about what was said, but about when the death happened. Rav Mari comes up with this really clever distinction. He says, look, if the relative died on the 13th and was buried on the 14th, that's Passover Eve, then the mourning is a rabbinic rule. It's important, but it can't override the Torah's direct command for the offering. But if the death and burial both happen on the 14th, the mourning is by Torah law, and that is strong enough to forbid it. And just like that, Rabbi Shimon's two statements aren't contradictory at all. They're just describing two completely different scenarios. It's a really elegant solution, right? It seems to tie everything up in a neat little bow. But, in the world of Talmudic debate, every single theory gets put under the microscope. And this one, well, it had a flaw. The challenge came from Rav Ashi. He points out that Rabbi Shimon used the more lenient case, the one where you can eat the offering, as proof for his whole argument. But if Rav Mari is right, Rabbi Shimon would be using a weaker rabbinic-level case to prove a point about a stronger Torah-level case. It's kind of like using a misdemeanor to prove a point about a felony. The logic it doesn't track. So the search for an answer has to continue. And this brings us to the climax of the whole argument, a total game-changing idea from a sage named Abaye that reframes the entire problem. Abbaye basically says you're all looking at the wrong thing. It's not about the day of death. It's about the time of day. See, the obligation to bring the Passover offering officially starts at midday. So his rule is brilliantly simple. If the death occurs before midday, the mourning kicks in first and takes priority. No offering. But if the death occurs after midday, that person is already obligated to bring the offering. That duty is locked in, and the mourning that follows can't undo it. Now here's where the argument gets really beautiful. To prove his midday rule, Abaye doesn't just repeat his logic. He finds another totally different puzzle and shows how this one simple principle solves that one too. Okay, so check out this second puzzle. It involves a priest and a Nazirite. When a priest wife dies on Passover Eve, he is forced to become impure to bury her, even if it means missing the sacrifice. But a Nazirite in the exact same situation is forbidden from becoming impure and must bring the offering. Why on earth would there be different roles? And here's the aha moment. Abbaye's single midday rule unlocks both of these mysteries at the same time. The difference isn't about being a priest versus a Nazirite, it's all about the timing. The solution is just so simple. The priest's wife must have died before midday, back when his primary obligation was still to her. But the Nazirite's relative must have died after midday, when that Passover obligation was already locked in place. One rule, two puzzles solved. It's just elegant. So, after all that, what do we take away from this whole intricate journey? The solution itself is brilliant, for sure, but the real lesson is in the process. I mean, we just witnessed a masterclass in legal reasoning. We saw them try reinterpretation. Let's just redefine the term. We saw them try making contextual distinctions. Let's separate cases based on timing. And then finally, we saw them establish a brand new, powerful principle, the midday rule, that didn't just solve one problem, it resolved multiple conflicts at once. And here's the crucial point. The goal was never just to make the contradiction go away. Every failed attempt actually sharpened their thinking. The journey from a simple, it was a clerical error, all the way to Abaye's incredible unifying principle. That shows a real evolution in how they even understood the question itself. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? In any complex problem we face, is the goal just to find an answer, any answer that works, or is it to find the most elegant one? That single, simple principle that makes all the messy details just fall perfectly into place, deepening our understanding of the entire system.